I want to share these words from Mae West, the Hollywood actress and sex symbol from some years back. She said, "When I have to choose between two evils, I choose the one I haven't tried yet." So as I launch into our summer sermon series on the 7 deadly sins, I should probably admit up front, like Mae West, that I've tried them all. And as you can see, I live to tell about it. So we might begin by asking, what's so deadly about the 7 deadly sins? Now, of course, we could have just as easily chosen instead to do a series on the 7 cardinal virtues: justice, wisdom, temperance, courage, faith, hope, and love. But let's be honest, those aren't nearly as interesting as the 7 deadly sins. For whatever reason, evil is tremendously more interesting than goodness. I can remember when we designed my son's room a few years ago. He was into all things Star Wars back then. Needless to say, one of his walls is plastered with a larger-than-life image of Darth Vader and not Luke Skywalker. Let's admit it, Darth Vader is a lot more interesting. There is something about evil and sin that draws our attention. So this will be a sermon series that will take us into the realm of lust and gluttony and greed, envy, anger, pride, and sloth. But as you'll see today, you like that, huh? Randy's preaching on lust. Did you pick that yourself, or did we give that to you? I can't remember, Randy. Victor, I think you're preaching on gluttony. Is it gluttony that you're preaching? Sloth. Oh, gluttony is Reverend Davis. And Louis Rojas, where's Louis? He's preaching on gluttony, right? All right. So anyway, nobody needs to come. Oh no, you're preaching on gluttony. All right. But anyway, the thing is that we want to take some unusual perspectives on these, because nobody needs to come to church to hear that envy and anger and sloth are not good for you. I mean, we all know that. You don't have to come to church for that, right? So we want to try to look at how these things can be seen a little bit different. All religions tell us that these 7 are not good for you and can lead to all kinds of problems in your life. So, all right, we've got that out of the way. So let's go a little deeper. Let's take a little different course. Today I kick it off with what is considered by many to be the sin of all the sins, the foundation of all the sins, pride. It's thought by many to be that which is behind all the others. So it's interesting to note that we live in an era when we have taken pride and vanity to absolutely new heights with Facebook. It's become a new socially acceptable form of bragging and tooting one's own horn, so to speak. Yes, and we're not talking about horns like we just heard a little earlier, because I don't mind if, that's kind of a nice, you can keep tooting those horns, but we toot our own horns. So we post pictures of the huge fish I just caught, for example, and or the amazing breakfast I just cooked, or the cool hotel room I'm staying in on my vacation for everybody to see. Tooting our horn has actually become a national pastime. And we're generously exporting it now to other countries around the world. But let's face it, not all pride is bad. And it's certainly not all deadly. In Yiddish, my Jewish relatives used to call it kavelling, which is different from kvetching, which is Yiddish for complaining. Kavelling is what Jewish people do when they're bursting with pride, and it usually is associated with being delighted in the accomplishments of our children or our grandchildren. At graduation, my grandmother, for example, would be gloating over me, and I'd say, "Stop already," And she might say, I know, I'm kavelling." "That's enough, Grandma, you're embarrassing me. Give us a chance to cavell over you. You don't graduate from 8th grade every day. Come on." Is it really such a sin If it is, then everyone with a bumper sticker that says, "My child is an honor student," is going to burn in hell. Or what about the bumper sticker that says, my miniature schnauzer is smarter than your honor student"? Have you seen that one? Is pride in our pets also deadly? Where do we draw the line? The other day I saw a particularly proud parent who had a bumper sticker on his truck that said, "My child knocked up your honor student." There's something to advertise. That's almost as bad as those rubber bull testicles that are now, you see those being hung from the back of those trailer hitches on trucks? That's in Oklahoma. For those who are watching live stream who are not from Oklahoma, we see a lot of that here. But we're proud. We're proud people here in America. We're told from a young age that America is the best country in the world. We tell our kids to be proud and not to take a back seat to anyone. According to the author Bo Lazoff, our national child-raising strategy and the pervasive values imparted by television, in the movies, and our educational system to our kids as well as to everyone else is currently set up to deliberately produce self-obsessed, aggressive, pushy human beings. The main thing we need to notice about this, he says, is that with all this effort on self-esteem in our children, our nation's kids are not especially happy. In fact, as a generation, they're actually pretty angry and are becoming seriously violent at younger and younger ages. Many blame the father of the modern self-esteem movement, Dr. Nathaniel Branden, who wrote popular books that taught that building self-esteem in children is very important. And it has certainly taken root in American culture and American education. But the other half of his message that is often entirely forgotten is that what he says is that to have self-esteem comes from acting virtuously and behaving decently. His point was that most feelings of shame and guilt come from acting selfishly and harmfully. This part of Dr. Braden's message has been mostly lost, so that what we've been doing is praising our children regardless of how they behave towards others. And we teach them to think highly of themselves no matter what they do. What a mistake. In fact, one study showed that gang members scored the highest on self-esteem assessments in schools because they had learned very well to feel good about themselves regardless of the effect of their behavior on others, which is apparently what we've been instilling in our children for the last 30 years or so. Lazoff explains that what was initially a very reasonable idea to tell our children, "Sweetheart, you can always hold your head up high even if you're not the best at something," has snowballed into, "Kids, you should all feel equally good about yourselves whether you try or you don't try. Whether you do your best or not, and whether you act selfishly or unselfishly, what matters most is that you feel great about yourself." The problem is that this doesn't work. That people are not ultimately going to feel good about themselves if they're lazy, spoiled, self-centered, greedy, and apathetic. And that's a good thing. There's a basic human drive in us that when we fall short, we feel bad, knowing that we could have done better and we probably should have done better. But if everyone we know keeps telling us, no, you did fine, you did great, you should feel wonderful about yourself for exactly what you did, then our most basic drive, the drive for accomplishment, is quashed. And as Lazoff says, that's a very cruel thing to do to our children. What we've been doing is separating self-esteem from behavior and attainment. And that's the main difference between feeling a positive sense of pride, which is natural when we've worked hard for something, when we've accomplished a worthwhile goal. It deserves some cavelling. And that's very different from pride that's considered a sin or a vice, which is when it just reflects a bloated sense of unearned self-importance. People feel proud because they were born rich, because they drive a nice car, because they were born in America, or they were born a Christian, which is the one and only religion supposedly that knows the truth. People feel good about things that are external to themselves, and they have this bloated sense of who they are and what they are. And that kind of pride is deadly. So there are some types of pride that are relatively harmless, and even we could say healthy for people, but there are others that are deadly. And when I say deadly, I don't mean it in the way the medieval priests meant it. I'm not up here peddling tickets to heaven or fire insurance. By deadly, what I mean is they deaden our lives. They drain us of love and human connection. Certain kinds of pride cause us to refuse to change. They cause us to stop learning, and that's a kind of death. If sin refers to a mistake, then a deadly sin is when we don't learn from our mistakes and we keep repeating them over and over and over and over again. I meet people who are too proud to see a couples counselor when their relationship is on the rocks, and it can often lead, and often does lead, to the death of their marriage. Sometimes through divorce or the death of their marriage. They stay married, but they both know it's just dead. People who are too proud to admit their mistakes end up losing their jobs, losing friends. No one wants to be around people like that. Now, I know I'm guilty in an argument of not being willing sometimes to make the first move back towards reconciliation because I'm too proud, or I feel my pride has been hurt. I've spent some time in self-imposed isolation thinking to myself, I'm not going to apologize or say anything first. I'll just wait it out. Or wait her out, as the case may be. But pride will cause us to do all kinds of silly and sometimes even destructive things. Now, you may know I have a 12-year-old son and I have a 4-year-old daughter. Well, let's face it, I've never had a 12-year-old preteen son before, and nor have I ever had a 4-year-old girl. And every stage of parenting, as I'm learning, has its own unique challenges. And so recently, when the Children's Religious Education Department here at the church was offering a class for a parenting class, my wife said, we should take the class. My first reaction was, what, are you kidding? I'm the senior minister. I should be teaching that class. And Anitra looked at me like, who are you kidding? That's the thing about spouses. She didn't even have to say a word. She just had to give me a glance, and my puffed up, prideful ego was just reduced to nothing. Now, I knew she was right immediately. It just took me a couple of days to admit it. And I was really glad that we took the class. I learned some things that have been very helpful with my kids ever since. But if we're not careful, pride will keep us from learning, keep us from growing, in part because it's a form of delusion. We talk about being enlightened, we talk about seeking the truth, and yet pride is a form of illusion. This kind of pride, for sure. The reason that pride is associated with death is that anything that's not continually growing and changing is dying. And a puffed up sense of self keeps people from associating with other people because they feel like they're above them. And then there's the all too familiar anti-authoritarian form of pride, people who say, nobody's going to tell me what to do. There are people who never grow up, they never learn that there really are people in certain areas and at certain points in our lives who are more powerful than them, or more intelligent, or have more influence or more experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just life. And so their pride keeps them from seeking help and advice, and it makes it hard for them to work well with others. And of course, the bigger the ego, the harder the fall. The bigger the delusion, the more massive the disillusionment when it all comes crumbling down. We see this with sports stars, politicians, preachers, and business leaders who seem to have it all. They have fame and money, respect, a great career and families, and they become so full of themselves that they think that they can get away with anything. And as the Bible says, pride goeth before success. That's not what it says, does it? No, pride goeth before a fall, right? Or before destruction. And we see a lot of folks who destroy their lives and their families and their careers and a lot of other people's families and careers because of pride. But the other thing that's a little less intuitive that I learned recently from my friend and colleague, Dr. Ivy Norris, is that a victim mentality is also a kind of pride. Think about it. A victim mentality is very self-centered. It's all about me. Claiming to be a victim or hanging on to a victim identity is a way of maintaining one's pride in the face of failure. It's not it's not because of me. It's just, I have all these circumstances out there. It's not my fault that I'm not successful, that I can't keep a job, that I'm in jail. I'm a victim of circumstances. It's often a way to keep a person's ego intact by blaming external forces rather than taking responsibility for ourselves. People who live with a sense of victimhood, like other prideful people, are very self-absorbed. They're also very judgmental, usually dividing the world into good people and bad people. They're the good one and the bad ones are all keeping them down. And like other prideful people, they're stubborn. You can't give a suggestion or constructive criticism to a person with a victim mentality. They won't listen. They too are stuck. And their victimhood is a form of pride that becomes an excuse that keeps them from changing and growing, and therefore is a form of death. Addicts are also often full of pride. Every addict I've ever met before they entered treatment thinks they're unique. I don't know if you've experienced this. Every time they say, 12-step program, it won't work for me. I'm different from those other people. I don't need that. That won't work for me. Every single active alcoholic that I've ever met in my life has thought that they were unique. It's all pridefulness that leads to death. And in the case of addiction, it leads often to literal death. But if an addict is lucky enough, and they seek help, it will just be the death of their ego, the death of their sense of uniqueness that dies, so that they can be reborn, sober. They're trying to kill something. They're pouring poison into their body nonstop until they're sick. But what they're trying to kill is not themselves. They're trying to kill their ego that's telling them they're so unique and so special and so different and such a victim and all this other stuff that they're trying to kill. And the ego can die through good therapy and 12-step programs and other help. But part of the dynamic of pride and addiction and all these things is shame. They're related, shame and pride. In many ways, it can be a reaction to shame, pridefulness, and it can be a way of coping with shame. And so in a healthy form of pride, it can be an antidote to shame. Think about the gay pride movement for a second. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks for generations have been taught to be ashamed. And gay pride has as its premise that LGBT folks should be proud of their sexual orientation and their gender identity and see it as a gift to themselves and to the world. It's the same with racial pride. As Michael Eric Dyson has said, when a healthy pride has been systematically denied to an entire group of people because of race, gender, sexual identity, age, and the like, then pride as a form of positive self-regard has an essential role to play. He goes on, black people, for instance, who were put down systematically and lacerated, lashed even, with vicious forms of self-degrading reflection, said, "No, you can't make us believe we're nothing." James Brown wrote the song for it. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That was an important song and a significant moment in American history. This week we commemorated the 50th anniversary of when Governor George Wallace stood on the steps at the University of Alabama refusing to allow black students to enroll. That was just this past week. He was vowing segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. And this same week, 50 years ago, was the night that civil rights activist and World War II veteran Medgar Evers was shot dead in front of his Mississippi home by members of the White Citizens Council for his work to end segregation in schools in Mississippi. In light of this history, the role of black pride and other forms of pride among groups that have been systematically degraded and demeaned has a life-giving role. It's not deadly in that sense. It's life-giving and affirming. So pride is not always deadly. But in the end, it's never enough to be proud based on any group affiliation or any external reality. Real pride and real self-esteem can only come from behaviors that are sincere and heartfelt and hard-earned. Now, I can't conclude a sermon on this topic without saying a word about religious pride. Because it's one of the worst kind, because it's so hypocritical. Right? Now, I don't want to put down anybody's religion, especially, I love Christianity, and I love my brothers and sisters who are Christian very dearly. But many Christians, for example, think that they have a corner on God and religion. They really believe that. It's like they think that they're the only ones who have the bat number to the bat phone. As if God only listens to their prayers and speaks through their prophets and their preachers. Fundamentalists of any religion, and all religions have them, don't think that anyone else can have a positive relationship with God except in the way that they have it. And by using words and using the same words and the same scriptures and the same names as they use. Talk about being deluded. Even though billions of people, not thousands, not millions, billions of people all over the world who are of other faiths explain that they too have a powerful relationship and a sustaining relationship with God, some Christians are so arrogant to say, no, you don't. You can't, because we have the only true and direct line to God. Give me a break. And the sad thing is that they don't even realize how conceited and parochial and deluded they're being. Actually, it makes me feel better to know that they don't realize that. All the while they're preaching about the sin of pridefulness and claim to be seeking the truth through great sacrifice and hard study and work. Now, I don't want to pick on Christian fundamentalists, because every religion out there has its fundamentalist group within it who think that they have a corner on God and spirit and righteousness. And atheists can be just as arrogant, and Unitarian Universalists, and you name it. We all have our ways in which we become arrogant. I mean, I know that I might laugh. I laugh sometimes. I'll admit it. I laugh sometimes at some of the crazy, what seem to me crazy things that some people believe in their religion. And I realize that that's my pridefulness and my own arrogance, and I know I'm guilty of it. But here's what I respect about any person or any religion or any group. In the end, I respect actions, hard work, courage, sacrifice, and love. What I honor is anyone of any faith or no faith who work for the common good of all humanity and all life. In the end, self-esteem and true pride must come not from any association with a group, any set of beliefs, or any external factors. It must come from the ways that we go beyond the self, beyond the ego, for the good of all life and all people. Amen.